So our final panel today is on preparing for next steps. And we've had some conversations and questions already about where we go next and what that's going to be. And in preparing for this, we sort of knew that that was going to be the next big thing. So our thoughts were, well, let's talk about ratification, and then the next conversation really needs to be, what do we need to do to prepare and start getting ourselves ready? So I thought that it would be a good way to close this one off is to just give a little bit of a teaser into some of that. And we've got two experts here to join us. We've got Dillon Johnson from Tla'amin and Huu-ay-aht John Jack from my community of Huu-ay-aht. And thank you both so much for coming to join. I've been giving just brief introductory on your bios for all of our presenters. And just because I know you all so well, I don't feel comfortable reading off a paper. So I'm going to allow you to fill in the blanks, but I'll start with Dillon and then John, and then each of you can fill in as you do your presentation. So Dillon, I've known for many years, again, another treaty brother. Dillon has got so much experience that he brings from not only his work with his own nation, but outside. He's very involved on the financial aspect and provides a lot of advisory services. He was very involved, as I understand, in the development of the collaborative fiscal policy, so an expert in that, and has really helped a lot of communities, First Nations communities, and upcoming treaty partner or treaty nations in particular, to help to understand what the fiscal landscape is going to look like and what your organizations might look like in terms of the kind of capacity that you need to do the jobs that we need to do under treaty. So Dillon, that experience that you bring is just fantastic. He also serves as the vice chair for the First Nations Financial Management Board. And new to me, I read in your bio, Dillon, congratulations. Very recently, you have taken on the position of CFO for Tla'amin Management Services, which is fantastic. Great news to hear. Nice to see our people taking on those roles. John Jack, obviously I've known him for a very long time. I've mentioned him a couple of times during the session today. John came to us out of university with fresh minds and lots of academia to share with us, and came in with eventually a very open mind to learning. And I'm just always so impressed with John, all of the things that he does, and the leadership role that he's taken on in our community. He has been on our council for, I've lost track of how long. He was for a while the only council member that served pre-effective date and post-effective date. So that was an accomplishment in itself in terms of what he picked up and learned as a leader in our community during those times. He's been serving on the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District since the time of our effective date, and it says a lot that he's been elected by his peers there for 2 terms to act as chair in that capacity as well. So the breadth of knowledge and experience that John brings is really amazing. And John, I just love listening to you anytime you speak. So thank you so much for joining us today. So back to Dillon. Coin flip, you get to go first today. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm just going to turn it straight over to you.
Aja Cheput, Checha Tanapash. Thanks, Angela. And hello, everybody. My name is Dillon Johnson. My Tla'amin name is Tokwanan. You had a bit of a bio. Thanks to Angela. And I'll just add a couple of quick points. I also, similar to John, have served as an elected leader pre-treaty and into implementation. I've also participated as a contractor for some of the work, particularly around after ratification, ramping up into self-government. So that'll be kind of the crux of my presentation. And also, post treaty, I took a break from politics for a while and just focused on consulting work. And I did some fiscal work for negotiations and so forth for Tla'amin, and I could speak a bit about that. But I do have some slides I'll pull up. I really appreciate the invitation to share some experience, and I'll just preface that with, this is kind of my perspective of the Tla'amin experience. Other Tla'amin people may have other perspectives. I know we had Roy. I saw Roy and Clint both on the agenda today, and that's excellent. And the 3 of us were all kind of in the thick of all this work around ratification and the next steps and so forth. So I'm sure we all have bring some of our own we have unique scars and some unique kind of opinions of where things may have been handled more smoothly or what have you. But this one is mine. So I don't think I need to go back over where we're located. Most folks probably know where we are, up on the what's called the Sunshine Coast. Ironically, Sunshine Coast. But yeah, here are the kind of, when I think of preparing for the next steps, I think of kind of well, two areas and then some kind of conclusions or takeaways. Immediately after the ratification, if it's a yes, then the work begins on what is setting up for self-government. And um, I've got some observations there, and then after the effective date, the work doesn't stop. It was a huge ramp up to get ready, and then when the effective date happens, it's a whole lot more work. Continuing to build and continue to negotiate, right? Like negotiation doesn't stop either. And then I'll have some takeaways. So when our treaty was ratified, it was a different time than today. So some of my observations may be a bit like you know uh, negative, but I will say I'll point out where there's been advancements made. Just because I've been kind of brought in to help with some of this work around startup. But essentially, when I mean startup, I mean again from ratification to the effective date. When you get all the work, your law development, policy development, plan development, training. What's your org chart going to look like? What are we communicating to community about the work we're doing? All this. It's a ton of work, right? And in our experience, from my opinion, like there's a ton of work. We've for better or for worse, we had like over 4 years to do it because the federal government was doing like taking really long time to get their ratification process done. But it allowed us quite a bit of time to get set up, but there was not enough funding, really, and that was at a time where it wasn't needs based funding approach to the startup envelope of funding. It was basically, here's what Canada's offering for law development. And that's all they really acknowledged. They would, acknowledge that there's some communications and stuff like that, but really the focus was law development. But that's not all you're doing after ratification. You're looking at all sorts of things. There's plans, there's policies, there's like I said, HR work, change management, like all these pieces that that need to be worked on. So yeah, and of course, when you're kind of it's like kind of, what's the analogy? Building a car while you're driving it, sort of thing. Like we didn't know, we never built a car before, right? We knew that what things we wanted to change from the Indian Act, but we didn't really know how to build, things like what's our building code look like? What is our development permit process? Like all those things. And that's where we looked at other treaty nations who were really generous in sharing their time and obviously all of their work. So that was tremendously helpful. But we also had to lean on, municipalities, in our case, the local one, the city of Tall River, and like I said, you're kind of building this in a vacuum, and it doesn't really. We didn't really have the opportunity to sit down and say, what do we think is going to work for us? What can we actually operationalize? What capacity do we have to enforce and kind of make sure that there's a compliance regime and around the laws and regulations that we're passing. So, I mean, to the best extent, it'd be good to be able to kind of build it tailor-made from scratch, but time and money, and yeah, people's attention. Like it's I didn't come to those discussions with an informed, an experienced basis on what a development permit process would work for us. Like it's just not something we'd done before. So I know it's tough, but try to build it kind of custom, I'd say, to and bring in people that have the experience to lend some advice. Yeah, it was, again, communication is always that kind of back burner piece that we still don't kind of dedicate enough time to it. It's always something that you can never do too much communication. So we found that uh, that even today, we're getting on 9 years. It's a lot of people have a pretty limited understanding of the treaty and all the pieces that we put in place. So encourage folks to dedicate what effort into that communication engagement side of things, and try to reach people as best you can. Not enough commitment to training. Yeah, the thing is, we talked about training a lot, and like, people need to get trained for new jobs, and we need to set up mentorship, and but it never really happened. There's always stuff that got in the way. People were too busy. We didn't dedicate like and then kind of mandate process in that regard. It was again, and then like when it came time to be like, ooh, if this person, is going to be responsible for now, permitting in all of these different areas and enforcing this, like it was like a tough conversation to have with somebody. It's like, your job's going to change. It's going to get a lot harder and you need training. And so it'd be like, well, there was kind of like that, like politics in a way, a little bit, I think, of like kind of addressing some kind of HR training kind of needs. So, and then when it comes, we still hear it today at some of our community meetings about leaders that were there approving the laws that didn't, I didn't sign up for this. This is the new structure. I don't get why we did it that way. Well, it's like, well, we did go through this. I was on council at the time, so were you, and you voted. We both all voted for this. So again, maybe, what can you do? I mean, but communicate, gauge, make sure there's a record of the different kind of levels of endorsement and approval. The cartoon, I will share this. Some of you have seen me present on this topic, probably seen this before, but this is the thing around change management that was missing in ours. I think we didn't have a change management strategy. People want change. They want to get out from under the Indian Act. But then when it comes down to, well, your job's going to change, or, oh, we don't, throw resolutions on the floor at an AGM, and we actually have a different process for that now. It's change is tough. So sorry, I just got to move something on my screen. Yeah, there's a lot of like what did Catherine Tenise used to say? You got to unlearn the Indian Act, because that's a big part of the process. Is because people go back to what they're used to or what they're familiar with, which is the Indian Act, which has been imposed on us was imposed on us for over 100 years. So we're still grappling with that. Some challenges with treaty partners who um, made a promise and this big step forward on a new relationship, but really still kind of still thinking of us as an afterthought and not really the different departments, ministries, or what have you, kind of pointing us over to the to MER or INAC, whatever, because let's say the Department of Energy doesn't want to deal with us, even though we have a treaty and it's a whole of government approach. So I will say things have gotten better that way. There's we formed an alliance of treaty nations. We've kind of got some commitments there for a whole of government approach, and there's been an investment both federally and provincially into that like kind of treaty implementation infrastructure. So, but that was not the experience fresh out of the gates. And one thing we bumped into is the kind of general public around the town. People go, "Oh yeah, they got a treaty. Like, work's done. Like, see you later. Like, you guys got what you got, we got what we got, and we don't, stop making any noise about, like stick to your lands and so forth." But so when we voice our opinion on all sorts of different matters, like we kind of see that kind of discourse raising up. So I think that like an effort needs to be made by all treaty partners that that treaties are living agreements and it's a new relationship going forward. It's not a divorce, and we use that often in treaty implementation federally, provincially, but even, down to your municipal and kind of, Joe Sixpack sort of level. That needs to be part of the education that needs to happen. So as I said, I've been involved in a lot of the work around treaty innovations and so forth. And I would say that my perspective, like treaty implementation has gotten a lot better. I said due to policy changes, like I said about like the investments in infrastructure, there's federally, there's this modern treaty implementation policy. They've got an office now established. So there's, people that you can call and they can coordinate within their government about implementation challenges. Provincially, there's not quite that infrastructure yet, but there's a growing team within MRR around implementation. I've seen improvements in that and kind of this alliance that we have. When we're united, 8 nations together, all on a treaties, we're able to get more attention from our treaty partners at BC. Even though we have separate treaties, it is useful to have have some common issues that we can advance, and it is getting better. The fiscal relationship has gotten better. Fiscal, like the funding arrangements under the collaborative fiscal policy, the startup funding, as I mentioned, that is different. There's a needs-based approach for that. And then, of course, just the last, I don't know, 6 years or so of federal Liberals and provincial NDPs, they've spent more on Indigenous housing and infrastructure. So those aren't necessarily going to endure. But we have seen, as being a modern treaty nation and having capacity that we've built up through the core governance funding, through the fiscal policy, has allowed us to access millions and millions of dollars in grants, just because we've got finally able to have people in there. It's like once you have some capacity, it's easier to kind of access the funding that you just weren't able to before. It's you demonstrate, you provide funders confidence, and they'll give you more money. So that's what we've seen. Another bright spot has been our ability to bring people home to work for the nation. There's people that have gone away to school, kind of like John, myself, a bunch of others from Tla'amin go away to school, come back, or not even school. They go away to get some experience somewhere, and whether there's carpenters, electric plumbers, what have you. Even if it's just work experience, and some have staying home and they're just homegrown. But the point is, we're building this nation government with our own people, and that's important. And there's more work to do there, right? Like we still have quite a few of our senior managers as non-Tla'amin, but everybody knows that they're working themselves out of a job. But we've got to do a bit better as coordinating our people that are going off and making sure they know that they've got a home, and maybe give them a bit of guidance as to what fields to enter. We were famously a very divided community. We still are in some ways, but it's less now. Our treaty vote was blockaded. That may have come up earlier, but we've since we've moved past that in most respects, and we're just the focus is, let's make the best out of this new treaty and this new government and relationship we have. And then finally, one of the great things is we've managed to get a lot of people off of social assistance, and we've been able to get, I think our file load is only in like the low, maybe like 12 to 15 or something, and it used to be in the 70, 75, 100 sort of range. We're able to provide support for anybody who wants to go get post-secondary training or schooling. And so for a long time under pre-treaty, we had a wait list, right? And it got it was brutal actually to operate in that way. But now we don't turn anybody, tell anybody that they're on a wait list for funding. We fund everybody's aspirations. And we even have a trust established for helping people start a business if that's the route they want to go. Yeah, so my key takeaways, treaty making's gotten a lot better in recent years. A lot of the barriers have been addressed. Treaty loans, full and final, the extinguishment policy is done, fiscal policy, OSR. How could I forget Section 87? So these are all massive, massive changes that have been, the treaties have been stuck in that those sticky mandates for years that have been a hurdle, and now they've been addressed through policy. So I say that through policy, meaning they could change policy. So it would be good to see another a treaty lock in a constitutionally protected agreement. Some of these like expenditure need in a fiscal chapter, for instance, because a group like Tla'amin would take advantage of that innovation as well. So we're kind of, we're not interfering, but we're rooting on, I think, other tables. I would say it'd be good to again communicate with the community, understand what they would like their nation to look like, and communicate those potential, those changes, so it's not a surprise, But I don't know. I feel like it is really hard to reach people that aren't that engaged into the nation affairs, government affairs. But regardless, last one: start building your HR plan. Invest in it now. What I can say is that, and it was a game changer for us, the new core governance fiscal funding is like the ability to actually pay people kind of at a competitive level, instead of kind of expecting people to take a pay cut to come work in a very stressful and sometimes dysfunctional environment. We're paying them competitively to work in a very dysfunctional environment. No, I'm just kidding. We're actually doing much better there. But investment in mentorship and training and all this stuff, it does need commitment from the top. This is the plan. Go implement. And leadership, keep your fingers out of it. That's where I would leave it. So thanks, and I hope I did okay for time on that one.
Great. Thanks so much, Dillon. Great summary of such a big story. It's hard to sort of synthesize everything because the story is so big. And I think all of our presenters have said that today, is that, we could go on and on and on and on and on about some of these things. And there's such a huge story to tell. So I always admire people who can do it in 5 slides. I have never made a presentation less than 30 slides. So great presentation and great messaging. That piece about unlearning the Indian Act and unlearning, the way we've been forced to govern is a really big piece. And I'm a huge proponent and supporter of doing governance training and helping us to understand and think about how we can do governance, not necessarily in a strictly contemporary way, but how do we bring our thoughts and our way of doing business into how we operate our government. So I think that those are some of the challenges that continue. Clearly, this is a continuing journey. It's not a light switch. Effective date doesn't put us in the place where we're operating everything. And I think that message is a really good and clear one, that there's still always a lot of work to do. I did want to comment on your grant funding comments. I was doing some research, and John might tell me if I've got it right or wrong, but I was making a presentation at Comox a couple of weeks ago and actually looking into financials and sort of seeing where we were pre-treaty versus in our treaty environment. And it was really interesting to me that there's a myth out there and a fear that when you enter treaty, you're not going to have funding from government anymore, that you're going to have to do it all on your own. That's a huge message that has to get out to people, is that that's not the case. Tla'amin Nation tells me, and it's been said publicly, through the collaborative fiscal policy that you talked about, just for governance, not for programs and service, just for governance, they went from funding of $240,000 a year to $4.8 million a year. So you can do a lot with that kind of money, and there's a lot to do with that kind of money, whether you're a small tribe or a large tribe. The other piece was the grant funding. I looked at our financials, or I think it was our budget for 2024. $5 million was budgeted for grant funding. That's twice the federal fiscal transfers we used to get pre-treaty. So anyway, there's there's lots of impressive numbers there, and there's a lot more resources for us to be using under treaty to help us continue on that journey where there's so much work to do. So thank you, Dillon. Excellent presentation. We may have time for some questions, but let's go over to John.
Hi, everyone. Huu-ay-aht. I'm John Jack. I'm the Chief Counselor for the Huu-ay-aht First Nations. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. I'm hoping to share my screen, if that's okay. Let's see here. So I didn't originally have a presentation, but it looks like almost everybody does. So I figured what I'd do is I would just take part here. Okay, so this is, given how old I am now, I don't really measure time in years. I measure it in pounds. This was about 60 pounds ago, for me at least. And this was the day before the ratification vote. We called it the Huu-ay-aht Reunion, and it was in the old Alberni Athletic Hall. I'm right there. And the reason why I wanted to say this is that it seems like a lot of nations now are doing a lot of the same things that we either did or wished we did. And one thing that we found in going through this whole process is that we got to know each other better. We got to know ourselves better. The nation became closer throughout this whole process. So successful ratification is very important. But we're here to talk about next steps. So in terms of where we're from and what we do, this is the Huu-ay-aht First Nations. We're on the west coast of Vancouver Island. We're part of the Nuu-chah-nulth people. And there are 14 nations up and down the west coast of Vancouver Island that call themselves Nuu-chah-nulth. They made it through to the AIP stage of the BCTC process, and only 6 nations voted to go forward, and 5 of those nations came together to form the Monmouth Treaty Society, and they moved forward into the final agreement phase. And so the final agreement was finalized and initialed in, I believe, winter of 2009, and the treaty became effective in 2011. So incidentally, 2009 was the year that I was elected to council. I was shanghaied into service to the nation from university by people like Angela. Started off as a snot-nosed youth with a colonized mind in 2007, 2006 on the Constitution Committee, then ended up on governance and finance committee and so on and so forth. As part of the communications team and all of those things. We were successful in negotiating a treaty. We were successful in moving forward in wanting to rebuild our nation as it is. And so what I and the nation ended up really focusing on, away from, this is older information. In fact, our population is nearing 1,000, but our home and away dispersion is about the same. And that individual is now, I believe, a voting member of our society. So I probably should update some of these slides. I don't need to go through the historic context, but I think we all know that part of the reason we're going through and doing what it is we wish to do is based on not only the promise of the future and what we need to build, but honoring the past and what it is we need to do to honor who we are and where we come from. That modern context comes from that desire for change, and that's what the treaty making process is for. And once you're ratified, we have all of these things that we end up doing that end up really making our nation more complete from a political and legal standpoint. But there's a whole lot of doing in regards to this. And Huu-ay-aht has been doing this since 2011, and we've been learning a lot about the strengths and shortcomings of everything we've done up to that point. Because I was so deeply involved in all of these things to start, I do find myself fairly protective of some of the flawed things that we've done in the past. Now we're going through an iterative process to really improve things as time goes by. It's tough from time to time, but our nation is going through a process of change, and that process of change is kind of almost generational in nature. We've seen it electorally. We had a complete change in leadership and over the past few years. We've also seen it administratively. And one thing that I think is important is that the change that we've gone through is something that was at least contemplated, if not completely fulfilled in regards to what it is we were trying to do. From an administrative perspective, we were trying to build an arm's length and professional civil service. From an ECDEV perspective, we were trying to build an arm's length protected from political interference, arm's length business enterprise that would generate jobs and revenue. We focused a lot on creating relationships, such as joining the Alberta Claggart Regional District, of which I'm the chair. I've been a member since 2012, been the chair since 2017, and moving together and making improvements in our community, and also creating opportunities to create revenue opportunities and create job opportunities for our citizens by having business relationships and political relations being redefined as we move into the treaty era. To talk about the transfer from kind of treaty ratification into treaty implementation, however, there's a few things that we need to think on, and I'm really glad that we had some previous presentations about just the real campaign aspect of treaty ratification, how that intersects with making sure that we reach as many people in the best way possible. So I really appreciate the presentation that was done just previously. I really do see that treaty ratification is a political campaign, but treaty implementation is something else entirely. It's going from high activity and emotion, and then you have that cathartic resolution of having a successful treaty if you've done everything right, or most things right. And it ends up having kind of three categories of effect for me. And one is the change in the energy level. Two is the strategic focused shifts pretty much overnight. And then the importance of managing expectations and everything that creates. And I'll go into some detail there. So we go from kind of those high energy daily, weekly, and monthly push towards treaty ratification. Everyone, if you've done everything other presenters have already suggested, then you're going from a very war room or campaign mentality. Everyone is pushing in the same direction. Everyone is looking to do and achieve the same things. It's a close-knit team with high motivation to get out there and get things done. There's a central command structure. We all kind of know what it is we need to do. We know how many people we need to talk to in a given week, how many people we need to really follow up on, and what to report in any given month. We have to contribute to the presentations that are being given in homes and to our communities, and so on and so forth. We have focused and directed energy, and it all can culminate in good things. And for Monmouth, specifically Huu-ay-aht, we had more than 90% of our people vote that we reached. And then we also had a 90% vote in favor of the treaty. So a lot of work was done, but it came at a high cost. There was a very high burn rate of our resources. So money, communications alone probably spent somewhere around $90,000 a month. And that's outside of the cost of labor. And we got money from BC and Canada to do it, but we used our own money to do it as well. But it also cost time. We had a team of like 13, sometimes 16 people going out and talking because our community was so dispersed. We couldn't just focus on the 80% that lived within a stone's throw of the community hall, right? And so the approach was successful, but had very high energy. And then you have that cathartic release of just being able to say, no, it's done. We've achieved it. And so having that success is great. However, it leads to a bit of a shift in strategic goals. Like if you're using that kind of war room or campaign mentality, well, once you win the war, you actually have to do the work. People have said this already. And very quickly, get it done became get it right, because we have our own laws, our own accountability, our own transparency, all the things we need to demonstrate, because we're going from an old set of institutions that we all disliked to a new set of institutions that people still distrust because they need to see it work and they need to see it improve. So getting it right ends up being just as important as creating results, although those results do matter as well. That's the hard part here. So you go from what could be, necessarily that had to become what would be, and you had to figure out a way to actually make that determination. So there were very high expectations in regards to how this would all work, and sometimes that would would create a distinct rise in expectations in our people. There's a high level of hope and enthusiasm for what could be. And that became an enthusiasm and expectation for what will be. And we left enough room for people to have opinions on what the future should look like for Huu-ay-aht. More traditional, more economically centered, more in way wildly different and diverse, and sometimes counter directions. And so we had to actually go through a process of deciding what trade-offs we were going to make. Or if we decided to dither and not have any trade-offs whatsoever, how were we going to manage disappointing everyone, which Huu-ay-aht did in spades in several instances. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you kind of raise the bar high enough, as well as having a promise for people's lives to get better, you start risking something, and I don't have a slide for this. You start risking something called a resolution of rising expectations, or dealing with the J curve, or the de Tocqueville effect. All of these things where things are getting better and people's expectations are higher, and then when there's a dip, people react differently. I'm sorry to do this. My children are home. I'm going to run over there and lock my office door. Sorry about that. But the real aspect here is that I think we've talked about this in a few ways moving into this. So I was the only person reelected in 2011 from the old pre-treaty government. And there was definitely rising expectations in our community in regards to getting results. The problem, however, and I think some savvy politicians who, that sat one out, realized that the slow delivery was going to be the case, that there was a lot of things to figure out. So drafting and adopting laws is one thing, but actually implementing them and improving them and evaluating them and agreeing on what to do next was another thing entirely. And there were a lot of different steps that needed to happen, and there could be created friction and tension in regards to what to do next, or even how to interpret the information coming in. That's one thing that needs to be contemplated, but also we have to remember that we kind of asked for this, that we wanted to have that accountability. We wanted to have the opportunity and the freedom to disagree with one another and be accountable to one another according to how we saw fit. And so our laws held, our constitution was in the right place. The ways our government was set up did allow for those things to happen. But we didn't contemplate how to disagree with one another without it becoming lateral in nature, lateral violence and difficulties and that sort of thing. So what I found that was important for us to really go back and talk about was, what are our expectations, not only for us, but also for our people? So we went from communication frequency of like, go away, you've talked to us enough, right? We over communicated in almost every way, by phone, in person, home visits, all of those things, right? Social media, even though it was, before Facebook was really a thing, people still used Bebo back then. But we needed to realize that the communication frequency was not going to keep up. We were not going to burn $90,000 a month on communications after treaty implementation, because we didn't have a lot of the same. It was a little tighter back then, and I think somebody was talking about this in a previous presentation about, we were in the Harper years and we were in the Gordon Campbell years. We had not renegotiated our fiscal arrangements yet. And so that's important to note. And, I chatted something earlier saying, seeing what nations are able to do now, I feel a tinge of envy there, because it's like what could have been if we had the same type of thing, but you can't really dwell on that, right? Part of it is also at least ballparking a timetable for real and concrete change, whatever that may be. These things will change. We will build houses on this point. We will pave the road or whatever. Make sure you're communicating expectations so that people don't start fixating on failures in process rather than failures in result, because that's something that's going to happen often, and it's going to start to look like a lack of momentum when what it really is just learning as you go. And how people interpret progress is going to be important, and you need to get in front of that. So you need to manage those kind of things, but you also need to show that there's progress on direct initiatives that have a direct impact on citizens in whatever way is necessary. And so we've done things that do have a direct impact on our citizens, and we've brought benefits to our community. And sometimes we've made benefits that were sporadic. We've made them more consistent and sustainable, and people see it happening over time consistently. And some of these things are like topping up patient travel. Some of them are as foundational as what we do for education. And other things are, how we support our elders and so on and so forth. But it's also talking about managing the expectations of your government, because self-government is messy, it's slow, it's complicated, it's tedious, but it's all consequential. Going through all those processes, it's tedious, but it's consequential. It's important. But people will need to know how it's important, because part of administrative success is making sure you have the appropriate resources. And that's a whole kettle of fish in and of itself. You could have a whole conference about administrative success. But from my perspective, that's a question of resourcing and focus. Making sure that the people who know what's going on and know what needs to be achieved have the resources to build the team to do it and build the institutions to do it. But you're helping them do that as well. But it's also a shift in thought and approach. And not everyone on your team, whether it be on council, your hereditary leaders, or your administrative leaders, are going to get it. And sometimes they're not going to get it right away. And sometimes they're going to resist it. Because as much as people want change, some of them don't want to change. That was a great slide, Dillon.